Make sure
All
everybody is
right.
nice. Everybody else is nice and muted, just for now. Everybody else, yes. But not Bex, of course. No, Bex, don't mute yourself. Okay. So welcome everybody who's here, and if you come later, you're going to miss the welcome, but you're welcome nonetheless to the first of 3 parts in a series called Is God Listening? Biblical Modes of Jewish Prayer. And I'm so excited to be able to introduce to me, she's right here, so I don't know where she is compared to you, but this is Bex Rosenblatt. We actually met at the conservative yeshiva when I was there for my Israel year of rabbinical school. My school sends all of our students to the conservative yeshiva in Jerusalem. It is a conservative yeshiva, hence the name, very creative. And it's, I believe, the only conservative yeshiva in the world. It's the only place doing what it does. And it is an amazing place. We have so many different students. We're not just the conservative rabbinical school students who go there for their year. There's also students from RRC, which is Reconstructionist, students from Hebrew College, which is non-denominational. And there's just Lishma students, like Bex, people who just come there to learn. Only as I've been at Hebrew, so you have the kids on their kind of gap year, and they're a lot of fun, and they're definitely high schoolers. But it's cool. It's good to have, all sorts of ages at the yeshiva. It's an amazing, amazing place, and I'm so excited to bring Bex in. Just a little bit of introduction for her. She is the conservative yeshiva faculty in residence for the Mid-Atlantic region, but the upside of pandemic is that we get to bring in all sorts of folks who don't live here, and it doesn't seem unreasonable. She got her undergrad, bachelor's in history and German at Williams College, got a Fulbright to Austria, and then got her master's in Tanakh at Bar-Ilan University. She's the founder of Chavruta Tel Aviv, which facilitates Chavruta learning, which is kind of a learning in pairs, which is like a very long Jewish tradition of learning. A lot of what we did at the yeshiva was Chavruta learning. And she is an awesome, cool person. And maybe, I know Jennifer Rosenzweig mentioned in the chat that if you want to pull up the handout to kind of follow along, if you go to the chat, which is, exactly. Well, some people have it printed out. Well done. If you'd like to pull it up on whatever device you're on, you can go ahead and do that. We have access to it. If you go into the chat, you should click on the link. It'll take you right there. It's a PDF. And without further ado, I turn it over to Bex, who is going to be teaching us and leading us and processing with us all of the things that she can offer us today, the first of 3 parts.
Amazing. All right. Thank you, Sarah. I am thrilled to be here with you. This is the easiest I've ever had it to get to Texas. Before we get started, just 2 technical notes. One, if anybody feels like letting their video be seen, I love it when I can see you all. I love it when it feels like we're actually in class with you. I'm sure you're beautiful, amazing people. So if you want to let me see you guys on video, I'd be a big fan. Second technical note, right now, we're going to go through this text together. I'm going to ask a lot of questions. We're going to discuss together. I've got knowledge you don't have, but I don't necessarily have answers you don't have. So we're going to be discussing together, processing together. I'll ask questions, we'll think together. So that means you all need to talk. The way we're going to do that for now, we're fairly small. So if you have something to say, feel free to unmute yourself and say it. If we get bigger, I'm going to stop that. And I'm going to ask you guys to raise your hands if you want to say something. The way you raise your hand is, I believe you just go to the participants box and click raise your hand. Jennifer might clarify that for you in the chat if I got that wrong. All right, so with those technical notes, we'll get started. Thank you everyone who's put on your video. Before we dive into the text, what we're talking about over the next 3 weeks is we're talking about prayer. We're talking about how people talked to God in the Tanakh. We're talking about how people asked God for things in the Tanakh. And we're talking about what it is that prayer does. why people bother praying, why people talk to God. So before we look at that from a Tanakh point of view, before we look at how the Bible does that, just from you guys, 1 or 2 people, maybe 3 or 4 people on what it is that prayer does for you if you're a prayer. If you're someone who prays, why do you pray? What are you trying to do when you pray? Are you trying to do anything? Is it something that sort of happens? Okay. That's good.
I pray to show gratitude. My feeling is that I'm grateful, and I find things to be grateful for every day. And when I do say my prayers, I always thank God, and I find things to thank him for, because I found that before, sometimes you can ask and there's not always an answer, a real. So I pray to say thank you.
It's beautiful. Thank you, Esther. All right. Yeah, Daniel.
Unmute. Sorry about that. I don't get a lot out of prayer. I go to services every Shabbat, or at least virtual Shabbats, because of the community and the bonding and the good feelings I have doing Jewish stuff with Jewish people. But I have never had a white light kind of moment in prayer. I don't believe that asking God to help me solve my problems, it doesn't do anything. That's what my therapist is for. So that's my perspective on prayer. I don't mean to be
No, it's great. That is really interesting. That's something we're going to look into a lot, about whether prayer functions in the absence of community, and also how prayer functions maybe as therapy and maybe perhaps it shouldn't. We'll be thinking about both of those questions more next week. Martin?
Two things. One is that I find that during the silent Amida, I pray all the words, but in fact, my thoughts wander a lot during that period. So that's one aspect of it, is it's just sort of a quiet space for thoughts to wander. The other thing is I like praying b'tzibur. I like singing prayers in with a community, and I get a lot out of that aspect as well. Now, whether I have greatly deep connections with God or not, that's a whole different question.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Lily?
Yes, hi. Like Esther, I give thanks to God for all the blessings that I feel that God's given me and my family. And I pray for strength. I pray for strength for my family members if they're dealing with something. I get more out of praying either by myself or any other time than as opposed to using the liturgy at shul. I mean, sometimes it speaks to me, but I pray all the time.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Lily.
Hi there.
Yeah.
I'm Mark.
Go
Can you
on.
hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Well, one of my favorite books of Torah is Tehillim. And, you know, when I study Tehillim and I pray to God, I feel as if I'm speaking with a therapist when I read the different Psalms in Tehillim. I feel my relationship with God is very close and personal. I felt that way ever since I was, even before my bar mitzvah, I felt a special connection to Hashem. And, you know, I have to disagree with the other person. I certainly understand the way he feels, but I believe God listens to all my prayers and that he answers all my prayers. Not to say that I go to him with a, this is what I want list. And if what I'm praying for doesn't materialize today or tomorrow, it's just not God's time. And he may answer my prayers in a totally different way that I'm not expecting. But I believe the power of prayer is amazing, the type of communication we can have with God.
Great. Wow. Thank you, Mark. If someone wants to have a last comment on what prayer does for you, Sue, go ahead.
Prayer for me is mantra. It becomes a rote thing. And I find that sometimes I feel like I'm connecting to God, and most of the time I don't. But that's just how it is. I think it just depends on the day and whatever else is going on.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah, wow. I've asked this question to a lot of groups of people. I've asked this question to a lot of different people. I think you guys as a group were the most, you covered the whole spectrum. I mean, we've got Esther being thankful, Daniel with, I'm not sure this does anything, but I like people. All the way to Mark with I pray because God's listening. And also Lily, Sue, and Martin, like that was a lot. That was a whole wide spectrum of what prayer does. So over the next 3 weeks, we'll be reading 3 very distinct prayers. We'll be reading Lamentations 2, Psalm 88, and Ezra 9. Lamentations 2, which we're starting with today, is, as you might guess, a lament. It is this form of prayer that starts as a complaint against God, holding God accountable for his failure to live up to the covenant, looking at God and saying, hey, this isn't right. You have a covenant with us. You have a covenant with me, your people, and you've failed. You've broken that covenant. You haven't done what you're supposed to do. Look at me, because of what you've done, I'm suffering. Life is hard, life is bad, these things have happened, but I still choose to speak with you. I still choose to be in relationship with you. In fact, despite everything that's happened to me, you are my only hope. You're the only thing that can make this better. Now that's a horrible theological point. That's a horrible point to reach, to look at the one who's inflicted pain on you and say, the only way I can get out of this is if you make it better for me. But that's what happens in this lament, and in most forms of lament, is we go from accusing God to requesting that God help us, requesting that God heal us, requesting that God take us back, and usually requesting that God then crush our enemies. That's what most lament does. Psalm 88 is a unique form of lament. We'll be reading it next week. And it is much more in the Daniel stream of prayer. It's much more in the, I'm not sure God's listening. I'm not sure I have a connection with God. And I'm not sure there's any point. Ezra 9 is much more in the Mark stream of prayer. Ezra 9 will take us back to penitential prayer. In penitential prayer, we say, God, I know you're listening. Things aren't great right now. It's probably my fault. This is sort of like Esther's gratitude too. This is sort of this is what I see in the world. This is my understanding of it. And it exists. And then the Mark stream is, and this is what I'm going to ask you to do. I don't want to bother you. I know you're probably a busy guy up there, but if you have time, can you make this better for me? So we'll be looking at lament versus penitential prayer, starting today with Lamentations 2, a traditional lament. I'm going to give you a very brief background to Lamentations, to the book of Lamentations. Then we will start going through the text line by line. We won't have time to get through the whole thing in great depth. It's going to annoy me and it's going to annoy you, and I'm sorry about that, but you have the text, you have my questions that help you interpret the text for you guys if we don't finish the whole thing. So, very brief introduction to Lamentations. The book of Lamentations is written in the wake of the first destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BCE. Judah had been an independent kingdom. It had been the kingdom that David had founded. We slowly start to lose that kingdom. The way the Bible is written, we're losing it because our kings are unfaithful to God. The prophets warn them to be better. They're not better. The people aren't better. We go astray. And slowly we lose our kingdom until the Babylonians come to invade. And they get to the walls of Jerusalem in 587 BC. There is a siege for an entire year during which many of the people of Jerusalem starve to death. And I'm sorry for the gruesome detail, but they'll be relevant to what we're reading today. The king of Jerusalem, Hezekiah, tries to escape. He is caught by the Babylonians. They kill his children in front of him and then blind him. Really horrible. And eventually, 586 BC, Jerusalem falls, the Babylonians come in, they burn down the city, and they destroy our temple. They take almost everybody with them to exile in Babylon. Of course, when you destroy a temple in the ancient Near East, it's not just the building that's destroyed in ancient Near Eastern thought, it's also the god and the people. That by destroying the building, it's as if you've killed the god, and it's as if you've killed the nation that lived there. Especially when you send that nation into exile. And the book of Lamentations is sitting in that place where we shouldn't exist. Our God has been destroyed, our peoplehood has been destroyed, and we're coming back with a prayer, a very unique type of prayer, a lament, but still a prayer to this God who's not dead from this people who still exists. So with that background, we're going to jump into Lamentations 2. Is everybody okay? Does everybody have a printout or have access to it from the link that just got shared? Because great. If you don't, let me know in chat and I can share my screen, but I very much prefer not to because I like being able to see you guys. All right, so we're starting on the second page of the handout. The first page is just general questions for thought that you can look into in your own time. We're going to be reading this fairly slowly. We're going to be reading it 3 verses at a time. The actual text is in the boxes, and my questions are in between the boxes. One note on translation before we start. This is my translation. It is not pretty. It does not sound good. In fact, it sounds very awkward in places. Well, why did you do that, Bex? Are you just totally incompetent, you ask? I respond, no, I'm not, thank you. When you use my translations, they are very closely following the Hebrew text. So the more you learn with me, the more, if you don't have Hebrew, you'll learn to hear the Hebrew cadences through the English text. At first it'll sound awkward and then you'll start to pick up on it, you'll start to flow with it, and it'll sound like biblical Hebrew written in English. I also translate words. Every time a word appears in the Hebrew text, it will have the same word translating it in the English, which allows you to pick up on patterns you might otherwise miss. I don't know you all's Hebrew levels, so we'll be working with the English. I might refer to the Hebrew at points, but we'll be doing this in English. If anyone has Hebrew questions, I'm happy to answer them. All right, so first 3 verses on page 2. I just talked for a long time. Will someone read those first 3 verses for me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Alas, How can the Lord cover daughter Zion in a cloud of anger from his nose? He sent from the heavens to earth the splendor of Israel, and he did not remember his footstool on the day of the anger of his nose. The Lord has swallowed up and not had pity for all the pastures of Jacob. He has overthrown in his overflowing the fortified cities of daughter Judah. He has brought to the earth. He has defiled the kingdom and her princes. He has hewn down in fierce nose all the horn of Israel. He has returned back his right hand from before the enemy. He has blazed against Jacob like a flaming fire, consuming all around.
Wow, Sue, I wish I recorded that. You've got some, you are a reader, wow. Thank you. So these 3 verses, what's being described, what's going on, initial thought about what's happening in these 3 verses, what strikes you, what's going on?
To me, it sounds like almost like an anthropomorphization of God, from this physically removing him herself from the scene, from this of, we don't see God's back in the way we would say like Moses did from this, but that God is basically turning around and away and looking elsewhere from this, and we can't see God's face, and there's nothing to identify the God that we knew with anything else.
Great, yeah, yes, and even more so, wow, yes. So in these 3 verses, we haven't actually even used God's name yet. We've called God Lord, but that Lord is Adonai spelled out. It's not Yud-Heh Vav-Heh. It's not the proper name of God. It's just literally the word Lord. It's wonderful. Daniel.
It seems to me like it's just soaked in anger. This is a very accusatory statement. And by the way, I assume that you're going to tell us what the anger from his nose means. So that's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, so the way anger is usually expressed in the Tanakh is like billowing noses, is like snorting anger, is the clouds of anger coming out from like almost a bull's nose, is the way that anger gets expressed throughout the entire Tanakh. You're totally right picking it up here. It's also interesting to bear in mind as we keep reading Lamentations 2 together, that snorting out clouds of fiery anger is going to transform into the literal burning down of the city. So it's as if God, with like one big snort out of anger, has caught the city on fire. Great.
He's also, God is done wrong. He has made, he's defiled the kingdom and princesses, and he has, I'm not sure what the last 2 sentences of number 3 are, but it sounds to me like he's taken the side of the enemy. He is not only not helping us, he is betraying us. This is a lover this is a parent or a lover that has just done the worst thing possible to our egos.
Great. Yeah. So wonderful. Really interesting. It's not like the people who've actually done all of this stuff to us, the ones who actually came in and burned down the city, the one who actually destroyed the temple, that's the Babylonians. Like, the enemy is the Babylonians. We have a concrete enemy. And in these first 3 verses, as Daniel's pointing out, we don't mention the Babylonians. We don't say, the Babylonians did this, God, where were you? We say, God, you did this. You burned down the city, and you burned down the city because you were angry at us. So we're taking this unimaginable theological problem, right? This, maybe our God is dead. Maybe the Babylonians destroyed his temple and burned him down. and saying, nope, didn't happen. It was not the Babylonians who did this. God was using the Babylonians, and in fact, God was doing this to us as some sort of punishment. But there's also a hint. There's also this how could you do this, God, right? Esther, did you want to say something there?
It's the disappointment. I felt like, I mean, he did this and he blazed against and consuming all. It's our disappointment in what he did. That's the way I saw it.
Great. So going through these verses a little more carefully, and then we'll come back to what it is we think the speaker is doing here. So we start in verse 1. Alas, how can the Lord cover daughter Zion in a cloud of anger from his nose? So how is it possible that this can happen? That our God is covering daughter Zion? And so what we get there in the covering is not just the idea that like covered in fire, not just this cloud of burning city. We also get this idea that there's now a separation between us and God, that in some way God can't see us anymore. Like we are separated from God, but God's here, we're underneath, and there's a cloud in between, and that there's this distance between us and God. And that helps us to think about what the rest of this lamentation is doing. That we're calling out to God, and we're accusing God to help break through this distance that he imposed between us and him. He sent from the heavens to earth the splendor of Israel, and he did not remember his footstool on the day of the anger of his nose. So the splendor, the footstool are typically references to the temple. It's as if not only did you do this to us, not only did you do this to the city, but hey, God, you did this to you yourself too. Like this is your home and you destroyed it. How could that be? That refrain in lament is how could this have happened? Second verse, the Lord had swallowed up and not had pity for all the pastures of Jacob. He overthrown and is overflowing. He's brought to earth. He defiled. It's all of these images of what used to make our society, everything we used to consider normal, having been destroyed in a way that sort of resonates if you look around the world today. That you have the fields, the pastures, the leaders, the cities, all of that's been overthrown. The phrase brought to earth is a phrase that's going to repeat here. It's a really interesting theological concept, what it means to bring, the Lord is bringing something to earth. What do you guys make of that? Daniel, I've got no idea. Other thoughts?
I'm not a grammarian, matter of fact, I'm terrible at it, but there's no subject to the sentence. Well, he has brought to the earth. He has brought what to the earth? Or maybe that's the opposite.
Yeah, there's no object. There's no direct object.
It's brought is, well, that's all I can say. Sorry.
Great. Yeah, no, you're right. It's an awkward sentence. We don't have a direct object in the sentence, and it's almost, you can read that in a couple of ways. The way I believe Sue, who did the reading, read it, it's like it's almost as overcome with emotion. He is brought to the earth, and I can't even get out the thing anymore. The thing maybe even no longer exists. There's not even a referent anymore.
Could it have been edited out from the first version? I mean, not by you, by some scribe 2,000 years ago.
It's possible. Lament
censorship.
A very particular meter called kina, which just means lament meter. And if we read it in the Hebrew, you'd hear it. It's as if you're reciting the dirge and and so one reason that you have awkward phrases sometimes in the Book of Lamentations is so that it fits nicely in the dirge meter. Other thoughts on this brought to earth line? All right, we'll keep going. He has hewn down in fierce snows all the corn of Israel. He has returned back his right hand from before the enemy. He has blazed against Jacob like a flaming fire, consuming all around. Okay, so you guys were pointing out that we're starting to confuse God and enemy. We're like, here, there's still another enemy, and what God has done, what we're accusing God of doing, is not holding back his right, not striking them down, not returning his right hand from before them. So God with the right hand, his right hand, which struck down the Egyptians, which strikes down our enemies, rather than striking them down, he's refraining. He's returning his right hand from doing it. The return word there sounds awkward, but it's very important, because one of the principal ideas of lament and one of the principal ideas of prayer is the idea of return, right? We're seeking to return to God, and God is seeking to return to us. And as we both turn towards each other, that's where the connection happens, that's where the meaning happens. The second to final line of the whole book of Lamentations is a line you'll recognize. It's in English. Return to us so that we may return to you.
That's not the word return, though, in Hebrew, is it?
It's
I thought
shuv.
that was, what?
Shuv. Yeah.
I thought, what's teshuvah mean?
It means returning. It means turning back from the root shin vav bet.
Okay, I'm sorry. My Hebrew is really, really bad.
Well, thanks for trying. Thanks for playing the game. So yeah, this idea of tshuva, this idea of returning, here it's heshiv. It's he's returned back, or he is made to return back, and rather than returning back to us, he's returning from not striking the enemy. It's striking, if you forgive the word. That's how we're using it here. All right. We're going to, I'm going to skip the next verse 4, verse 5. I'm going to read out loud. The Lord has become like an enemy. He has swallowed up Israel. He has swallowed up all her palaces. He has wiped out fortified cities, and he has made great in daughter Judah moaning and lamenting. So if before we were flirting with the idea that God did these things and that God refrained from striking the enemy, here we're getting more explicit about it. He's become like an enemy. He's not quite the enemy yet, but he's become like an enemy. Then we got these images of swallowing up. Those swallowing up images are notable. You pay attention to them because of the background of Lamentations, where everybody starved to death. That at a time in which people are starving, God is consuming. He has made great in daughter Judah moaning and lamenting, as if the thing I'm doing now, the prayer coming from my mouth, God has caused to happen. All right, with this verse and with the first 3 verses, so far, what do we think the point is? Why is this guy opening his mouth? What is he trying to achieve? Or what's brought him to the point of opening his mouth? Yeah, Debbie. Oh, wait, let me unmute you or unmute yourself.
Everything is destroyed and God has done this to us in anger. So he's like the sadness is like a plaint. a lamentation that this is what's happened.
Great, yeah. So it's coming from a place of total destruction. This is almost a necessary reaction.
Yeah. You mean as opposed to an objecting and crying out against it? I hadn't seen that yet, but maybe because the language is so violent, I'm not seeing it.
Okay. Okay. Other thoughts? What's causing the speaker to speak? Why? What's he trying to achieve? Yeah, Daniel.
I tend to talk too much. I'm sorry. This is not a rational argument against God. He's not saying, God, you promised.
Oh, Daniel, I think you're frozen.
I'm sorry?
You froze for a minute. This is not a rational argument against God.
I'm not arguing a point in a legal fashion. It's off. He is so emotional that he's just sort of, I can imagine somebody, if I did this, somebody would look at me and say, Daniel, calm down. Not help me. So I mean, that's the way I'm reading it. I try to read it from a poetic sense, from a literary sense. He's really putting, the writer is putting words in the complainer's mouth that are incredibly raw and emotional.
Great, yeah. So from this place where it's like, he's not necessarily trying to achieve anything. He's not thought this out. This is just like, this is the pain put into words. All right.
Thank you for saying what I wanted to with fewer words.
Sue.
We thought we knew you, but there is a side to you that we didn't know about, and look at this. This is coming at us from all sides, and it's coming at us fast and furious, and we don't know what to do or who to turn to because we thought it was you, but it's not you.
That's an excellent point. This is not anger at an enemy, I don't think. It's anger at somebody you love that's betrayed you.
Great.
It's the ultimate betrayal.
Yeah. Martin and Debbie.
So what strikes me about this is how aggressive and ferocious God is. And we're like a cat scouring and, an animal scowling in the corner, sitting in a corner and whimpering. There's a gigantic contrast between the mood of God and our mood. And we're in sort of despair, obviously, and helpless, and God is aggressive and energetic and dominant and so forth.
Great. And so we've got two real contrasting images there. We've got the Sue Daniel image where it's almost like we're in relationship with God. It's almost as if we're married to God. And we are calling out to maybe an abusive partner, maybe we're calling out to the one who's hurt us, but we're also, he's the only one, like we're still married. We can't get rid of that yet. As opposed to the Martin and Debbie image, where God is the all-powerful God, and we're a little nothing. We're a little animal in the corner, and that this is almost the pain here is almost like the pain of an animal. It's almost this animalistic, like I can't do this anymore. I can't feel this anymore. It's a cry out without a claim on the power that's been hurting us. Is that fair, Debbie and Martin? Did I totally twist?
Well, and the other thing is it looks like a situation of domestic violence, right? You've got one violent spouse and you've got the other one who's completely
cowering in a corner. Although that's back to the married image.
To the married image.
Okay.
It's domestic violence going on here.
Great.
I think there's actually good reason to see that. I agree. For some reason, I keep going back to God had an affair. He's taken the side of that person down the across the street or whatever. There's a betrayal.
No, we had an affair. And we're being punished.
Yeah, it's really interesting because in the like traditional imagery, we're the ones who had an affair. Israel over and over is whoring after other gods.
But this person is talking to God and accusing God
Yes.
of this stuff. It's the other way around right now.
Yes. And that's this yeah, exactly. That is the incredible thing that happens in Lamentations. It's over and over in the Tanakh, Israel is accused of whoring after other gods. We have this covenant with God. We have this almost marriage relationship we are in with God. And over and over again in the Bible, we are the guilty ones. We are the one who broke the covenant. We are the ones who whored after other gods. We are the ones who cheated on our God. To the point that God decided, as he told us he would do in Deuteronomy, God decided to destroy Jerusalem, destroy our temple. And it's a fair punishment. He told us it was coming. He warned us through the prophets over and over again. If we keep cheating on him, he's going to do this to us. And then it happens. And then in the book of Lamentations, you get this Israelite voice speaking for itself, accusing God, saying, no matter what's happened, no matter what we did, this is too much. You've cheated on us. You have broken the covenant with us. That you've gone too far, you've done too much, you've become like the enemy to us. Cool. All right. So something we haven't, any last thoughts on that issue? So something we haven't talked about yet is who this speaker is. It seems to be a singular person talking, but the person who's talking isn't speaking, the person doesn't refer to themselves. The person doesn't say, you've done this to me, really. It's almost like he's observing, or sorry, I keep using he, it's going to keep happening, I'm sorry. The speaker is referring to what's happened to daughter Judah, to another person, to another people. It's almost like this is an observer watching what's happened to the nation.
If I may ask,
Yeah.
you brought it up. If you had to give a gender to the speaker, what would you think be most appropriate?
So
you don't have to. I don't mean to be putting you on the spot. I'm sorry.
No, it's bad. Put me on the spot. I like it. That's why I teach. So I keep calling him a he, and I would read him completely and totally as a he, because we're about to jump to the female response. That the first two chapters of Lamentations are a dialogue between a speaker and between Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is personified as this like, it's the city of Jerusalem as metonymy standing in for representing all of the people of Jerusalem, but she's a she. She's a full-on woman. She's described as having skirts. She's described as having a period at one point in Lamentations 1. She is completely personified as a woman. And one of the things you see in the first two chapters of Lamentations is the female response to destruction as versus the male response to destruction. So far, we've seen this male speaker, if you will, this he lashing out, this he saying, how could this happen? God, you've done this, you did that, you did this, you did that, you did this. We're now going to jump to Jerusalem speaking for herself in her own voice. It's an incredibly, incredibly cool thing to hear. We don't get that response elsewhere in the Bible. We don't give Jerusalem a chance to speak. We've spent so much of the prophets accusing Jerusalem of whoring after other gods, and here Jerusalem gets to speak back. So we're skipping to verse 11.
You're skipping 6? Okay.
Yeah, we're skipping a lot, and I'm sorry about it. I told you guys would be angry at me, but we're skipping all the way to verse 11. And Sue, I can't imagine anybody reading better than you. So would you be our reader again for verses 11 and 12?
Thank you. My eyes are finished by tears. My insides churn. My liver is poured to the earth over the destruction of the daughter of my people, by the little one and the infant becoming faint in the squares of the metropolis. To their mothers they say, where is the grain and wine? While they are becoming faint like one pierced in the square of the city, while pouring out their soul in their mother's bosom.
Great, thank you. All right, that's heavy. That's a lot. What do we make of this? This Jerusalem speaking for herself, Jerusalem bringing up these images, and remembering that our greater context for this class and for this chapter is prayer. I'll give you a second to process, to read those verses to yourself if you want. All right, thoughts on what these two verses are doing, how Jerusalem speaks, what she's talking about. Yeah, Lily. Lily, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay.
Great.
Her children are starving. They're crying to mother for food.
Yeah.
It just sounds heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's a absolutely devastating image, and it's not the worst that Lamentations is going to get. Do you want to read, if you're looking for something that's gonna break you down on the inside, I'd point you to Lamentations 4, the 4th chapter. We take this image and we run with it. But yeah, great. Other thoughts? What this image is doing, what Jerusalem is trying to do here.
I find this one, as I guess you were pointing out, a completely different voice. And it's also using that make it hard for me to follow. Squares of the metropolis. I don't know if you could help us, or if anybody else is having the problem with the images. I don't understand the liver. The liver is poured to the earth. I don't know what that means.
Great. Yeah. So if we go
a little bit.
If we dive into the text a little bit, I'll take us through. My eyes are finished by tears. All right, starting out right there. Like this is an impossible thought. This is I've cried so much. I've spent so long weeping that I can't cry anymore, that there's nothing left. That I have no tears left to give. My insides churn. Insides, the word there is a word that often is used in connection with birthing, with getting pregnant. And so we're presenting right away Jerusalem as the sort of mother figure, but rather than this, pregnant mother figure, rather than this mother figure who can care for her children, her insides are churning. My liver is poured to the earth, right? So liver, one, functions in the ancient Near East as the seat of emotions. It's this thing of mine, everything I've got has been poured to the earth. It's also been used before. I think we skipped this line, but above before this in Lamentations 2, God was shooting arrows into the liver. So it's as if God shot arrows and now the liver has been pierced. So of course it's poured to the earth. The last thing is the word for liver in Hebrew is kaved, which some of you will recognize as meaning heavy. So it's this my heaviness is poured to the earth. I'm dragged down towards the earth. We saw before, and we did read these lines, about God bringing splendor, bringing things from heaven to earth, God bringing down to earth. And so now Jerusalem is being brought down to earth, right? It's this pouring out just as God made happen. Over the destruction of the daughter of my people. Batami, every time we saw a daughter of Jerusalem before. There's a lot I could explain with that. I'm not in the interest of time. If you've got questions, I'm happy to talk about it later by email. By the little one and the infant becoming faint in the squares of the metropolis. So one of the things that happens when you destroy a city is you're homeless. That you have everyone out in the public space. There's nowhere to go home to anymore. There's nowhere to hide from the public eye. If you're left alive, you're left alive in public. And moreover, what that means is if you're these infants who are dying from lack of food, you're dying in the public eye. That this is somewhere out and everyone can see you, Jerusalem can see you. Of course, that brings up the question of why God is letting this happen. Surely God can see. I'll get you in one sec, Debbie. And it comes back to what we said in the very first verse. God has distanced himself from these people now. God has put a cloud between what's happening in the city of Jerusalem and himself. And so one of the things that's happening in this whole lament is we're crying out, we're describing what's happened, where Jerusalem is describing what has happened to herself so that God can hear, so that God can see. In Lamentations 1, Jerusalem has this refrain, this repeat, see and look at me, God. And here she's describing what it is that God should see. Debbie?
It reminds me of the pictures of the Warsaw Ghetto. The children in the street starving. That's starving in public. And that someone took a photograph of that. The exposed nature of this terrible thing happening, and is there any help?
Yeah, it's difficult enough reading these Lamentations, reading these images, knowing they happened 2,500 years ago, and all the more difficult that this is something that has happened in living memory, that this is a reality. All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to run us through the next couple of verses, which are super important verses as we think about what this is doing as a prayer. All right, so Jerusalem has just spoken. Now we have the first speaker speaking again. For the first time, he's mentioning himself as an I. He says in verse 13, "What can I bear witness for you? To what can I make you similar, O daughter Jerusalem? To what can I compare you so that I might comfort you, maiden daughter Zion? For large as the sea is your destruction, who can heal you?" All right. At the very beginning, Daniel talked about what prayer for him was. Sorry for dragging you back up, but he talked about that prayer for him was community, was being in community with people. And here we have, in this moment of utter and complete destruction, this moment of the breakdown of society such that infants are dying in the laps of their mothers, we have community. We have the speaker who, until this point, had been unwilling to identify himself, unwilling to talk in that I, unwilling to say, I am part of this and I am responsible. He now says, I'm here and I want to help you, but I don't know how. I don't know how to comfort you. I don't know who can heal you. Of course, the answer to who can heal you is presumably God. Is God caused this suffering, God caused this pain, and God's the only one who can make it good again, make you whole again. And that brings us back to that spouse relationship we talked about before. So I'm going to skip again a couple of verses to verse 18. It's still the speaker talking. He says, their heart cried out to the Lord, the wall of daughter Zion. Let tears fall down like a river night and day. Do not give yourself numbness. Do not let the pupil of your eye be silent. Get out, get up, shout out in the night at the head of the night watches. Pour out like water your heart before the face of the Lord. Raise to him your palms, for the spirit of your little ones, fainting from hunger at the head of the streets. All right. So the speaker has now gotten to the point where he's responding to what Jerusalem has said. Jerusalem has said, I can't cry anymore. I've got nothing left. I'm sitting here totally spent because what is happening should not be happening. That I've got nothing left to give when I look at the world and see children dying in the laps of their mothers. There's nothing more. There's nothing I can do about this. And the speaker turns to her and says, yes, there is. You don't get to be silent. That you have a responsibility to your children. You get out and you keep crying. You keep shouting out for their sake. And Jerusalem responds and says in verse 20, see God and behold to whom you have done this. Should women eat fruit, the little ones of their cuddling? Should priest and prophet be slain in the sanctuary of the Lord? They are lying on the earth on the streets, young and old. My maidens and my young men have fallen by the sword. You have killed on the day of your nose. You have slaughtered and not had pity. You proclaimed like an appointed time terrors all around, and there was not on the day of the nose of God refugee or survivor. Those whom I cuddled and made great, my enemy finished them. Yeah. Wow.
That strikes me exactly the way Debbie described Warsaw. I that kind of utter destruction.
Yeah. Yeah. And sitting here in response to utter destruction, we have Jerusalem crying out to God, asking God to see her, because surely if God sees this, surely if God were aware of this, it wouldn't keep happening. That the only reason we can possibly think that God's not helping is because God doesn't know. But then we end with this line, those whom I cuddled and made great, my enemy finished them. And there's a question of who Jerusalem is calling her enemy at that point. Is she talking about the Babylonians? Is she talking about God? So we're a minute over time. I'm going to finish really quickly, and we can process this a little bit more next week. But when we think about this that we just read as a prayer, it is incredibly helpful to me to know that there's a Jewish way to be angry, that there's a Jewish way to look at the world and say, this isn't right. And I can cry out to God and I can say, God, this is not right. And that God can take it. That if there's a God who's sitting up there, there's a way to think about a God who's omnipotent, who caused this to us, but needs me to go up and cry out to God and say, God, this isn't right, and I can hold you accountable. Tov. That's just a tiny little snippet. I will see you guys next week for Psalm 88. And thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Bex,
Yashar
for
Koach.
a great time. Yes, thank you. Please join us same time next week for the second of the 3 parts. And Bex, you stay well. And thank you so much for curating this space for us.
Maybe I missed
Thank you
something.
very much.
Can we get the handout before the class so that we can review it?
Yeah, I'll send it
Or
to
is that,
her right
is
now.
that possible?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we'll post it ahead of time, and we're gonna post a recording of this, excuse me, on the website. So if there's anyone that you think would be interested, they'll be able to catch up and then follow along for the next class as well. So we'll put all that out there on the website, and I'll send it to everyone who's here.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you, Yasher Koach.
Thanks, guys.
Now I don't know how to
Thank you,
stop.
everybody.
Here we go. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanks,
Oops,
Esther.
there
Good
we
to see you.
go. I don't know how to turn it. We're
You're
leaving.
okay.
Okay.
There you go.
Take care. Bye-bye.